This is Your City Could Be Better, because it could be. I'm David Plotz. If you love your city and still complain about it, you're in the right place. There's a fascinating labor fight brewing outside Las Vegas that could have huge implications for gig workers everywhere. Sex workers, or to use the Nevada term, courtesans, at one of the legal brothels located near Vegas are trying to unionize. The workers at Sherry's Ranch in Pahrump, Nevada, have long been treated as independent contractors, but they're now fighting to be recognized as employees instead because of the benefits that come with that. And if this argument sounds familiar, it's probably because you've heard Uber drivers, food delivery drivers, and other gig economy workers try and generally fail to make the same argument in courts across the country. So are brothel workers in Nevada going to set a precedent that changes how we interact with workers in every American city? I'm joined by former CityCast Las Vegas host, current contributor, and longtime Nevada attorney David Figler to break it down. David, welcome to Your City Could Be Better.
I am so happy to be here. Let's talk about sex, David Plotz.
Let's talk about you and me. So let's begin with the obvious point, which is that for people outside of your state, this is just weird, legal brothels. So where are they? How many are there? How are they legal?
Yeah, look, brothels were a part of, I think, the American West culture during the 1800s in many different states. Eventually, that all kind of went by the wayside, including in Nevada. But around, I'm going to say 1971 or so, the first county in Nevada legalized prostitution. It was presented as an experiment. You know, there were plenty of social ills associated with illegal prostitution. And this was an effort to not just curb it, but, legitimize it in a way that people were paying taxes and it was regulated, et cetera. So that's been going on for quite a while. Eventually, the state of Nevada caught up and they passed a law that allowed any county under a certain degree of population. So it immediately excluded the county where Las Vegas is and the county where Reno is. But all the other counties had the right, if they wanted to allow brothels. And I'd say of the remaining counties in Nevada, a little bit over half of them allow prostitution. Nye County, which is the one that is, about 45 minutes from Las Vegas, is one of the more notorious ones, and they have quite a few brothels.
So what are working conditions like in a Nevada brothel? If you work there, what is your job? What is your job like?
Sure.
And then after you talk about that, what are some of the unusual working conditions you would not find in other workplaces?
Well, obviously, it's a very intimate job. I mean, it is one that I think people can sort of visualize what it's all about. The difference is that it's very regulated. So the workplace, as it is kind of insular. As I understand it, you go on plots of time where you are in the brothel, like you cannot leave. Part of that has to do with disease control and exposure, et cetera, because there is a very stringent testing regimen. There is also other regulations that the state imposes in making sure that the brothels are safe workplaces, okay? So that is the sort of basic. When you get into the weeds of how the operations themselves work, it's a little proprietary. It's all very contractual. But essentially, a brothel worker will sign a contract, say that they're going to be there for the 2-week stretch or whatever it is. They live on premises. They sleep there. They cook there. They interact with each other there. From my understanding, it's a fairly social environment with the fellow workers. And then clientele come in. They either have made reservations ahead of time or, very spontaneous selection. And then they go back, negotiate a fee. Various sex acts occur, only those which the brothel worker is comfortable doing by all accounts. And then there's an exchange of cash for sex and move on to the next customer.
Do you know what the fees are by any chance?
They really do range. They're not allowed to advertise or discuss the fees outside of literally the bedroom spaces. So what will happen is a customer will go in, find someone who they find that they would like to have engage, and then they go back to the room and they negotiate it. Now the house is listening to the negotiations, just to make sure that there's nothing shady that occurs or nothing that would be off books because, the money goes to the house and then back to the worker. And it could be anything from a couple of $100s, I'd imagine, up to thousands of dollars, depending on how long you want to be there, how many courtesans you would like in the particular encounter, and probably a million other variations and iterations that exist within that universe.
So that's one interesting thing you just mentioned there, which is you're constantly being surveilled, at least in the transaction, if not, presumably not in the sexual activity itself.
Presumably not. Yeah, correct.
Okay. So what changed at Sherry's Ranch in late 2025, according to the workers? What did they say management was demanding that they sign in order to keep working there?
Yeah, and we had some workers on CityCast Las Vegas to talk about it. It's a fantastic episode. Sherry's Ranch is probably one of the bigger brothels in the state. It is the one that is, I believe, closest to Las Vegas. It's very fancy. A lot of brothels, especially out in the rural areas of Nevada, are essentially trailers that are interconnected, whereas Sherry's Ranch is a casino level, hotel level space with a golf course and some other amenities. So I have been there, David. I'm going to admit it to you. They did have an open house some years ago where they did a barbecue for the community. They were very engaged. One of the owners of Sherry's Ranch is a former homicide detective in Las Vegas. And a lot of the brothel workers and other workers, they serve food, they have alcohol license, live in Las Vegas, and they do the commute. So, Sherry's Ranch, maybe above and beyond most of the other ones in Las Vegas, certainly Las Vegas area or Southern Nevada area, is a fancy spot and tend to draw the more, high profile or accomplished courtesans. What had changed, in answer to your question, was the new contract. Because it behooves the brothel to maintain the sort of independent contractor who signs a contract, which theoretically has equal bargaining power, though we'll get to that probably in a second, they had put in some new provisions, and some of the workers there felt that it had crossed the line, mainly dealing with their intellectual property rights, their name, image, likeness, and then there were also some concerns about how AI might be used to take some of those images and in perpetuity utilize that person's face in a highly sexualized manner.
And with the intellectual property, so what do the courtesans say that Sherry's Ranch was asking for? And I think I want you to bring in OnlyFans here because there's an OnlyFans aspect of this.
So, really, ever since the pandemic, a lot of the sex workers, especially those who decide to go and work at the brothels, have been side hustling. There just wasn't a lot of customers, I think, during quarantine. It'd be very difficult to do some of the services offered while masked. And I don't know that they were doing COVID testing during the height. So, I think a lot of them turned to OnlyFans and found it to be a very lucrative side hustle. I think that there is a percentage of those workers who are also engaged in other adult-oriented or just general creative arts. The guest that we had on CityCast Las Vegas talked about that she's also in a band and creates music with that band. But, most of them are concerned about their OnlyFans content, stuff that's being posted on maybe some of the pornographic websites or the chat websites, et cetera, and how anything created while they were at the brothel during that time frame, because it's not constant business. There are gaps of time where they are making or augmenting their income. We're going to be fully the property through this contract of the brothel.
Roseman University's Neighborhood Health Series, or NHS, is a free monthly event with expert speakers on real conversations about health and well-being. It's free to attend, open to the public, and includes a complimentary meal. These are big picture conversations on global health, prevention, and collaboration across professions. So join the event March 26th in person at Roseman's Summerlin campus or virtually via Zoom. This month features founding Dean Catherine Fogelberg and looks at Roseman's proposed College of Veterinary Medicine. As Roseman takes steps towards opening Nevada's first College of Veterinary Medicine, This is a chance to learn why veterinary care matters for all of us and not just our pets. Learn how veterinarians play a major role in healthcare teams, including supporting animal, human, and environmental health. So join Roseman in person at the Summerlin campus or virtually via Zoom. Register now at speakers.roseman.edu.
Let's go to this question about, which I think is at the heart of this and why we're doing this episode. I mean, we're doing this episode, I suppose, because it's salacious, but it's at the heart. But it's the, this question about gig workers or independent contractors.
Yeah.
So management of Sherry's Ranch says they're independent contractors. The courtesans say that they are employees. What is this distinction? Why is it important? And how does it get decided?
That is really in every state. This idea of who's an employee and who's an independent contractor has implications well beyond whether you can unionize or not. But that is a prerequisite. Like if you are an independent contractor, you're not eligible for unionization. If you are an employee, obviously you are. And so, this fight in Nevada is not limited to the brothel workers. There's some precedent here within the state of dancers at gentlemen's clubs, exotic dancers, strippers, that have been asking for status as employees so they can claim overtime, they could get workers' compensation, they can, log in at least a minimum wage in addition to that above and beyond for their services. And, the Nevada Supreme Court has consistently said, because of the nature of how the strip clubs control how the dancers operate, what all the rules are, how they function, that they are indeed employees. And then the Nevada State Legislature very dutifully changes the rules and expands what an independent contractor is. So it kind of vitiates what the Supreme Court has determined under the law. And I think this fight is happening in many states because there's so many fields. Construction is probably the biggest one, David, where the distinction between who is an independent contractor and who is an employee is at the heart of not just union battles, but these other, state compensation battles. And then when it comes to the idea of, what is work product, when you're an employee, sometimes what you create is owned by your employer, whereas an independent contractor, you tend to be able to negotiate those rights. And that's something we saw with the Screen Actors Guild as a union trying to negotiate for their members. And so outside of there being contracts, ultimately, a state has to determine whether or not somebody is an independent contractor who's not subject to some of these regulations or an employee who it is. With a battle like this, it goes to the National Labor Relations Board. And the brothel workers have affiliated with the Communication Workers of America, which is a prominent AFL-CIO union. They have filed a complaint at the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, saying that they need to be designated as employees and that they have a right to unionize if they choose to do so, but also that they're deserving of the protections because some of the brothel workers who were behind this labor effort were, basically told that they cannot continue to work at the brothels.
So I know you're not a labor lawyer and you're not representing anyone in this.
I was a labor lawyer back in the 90s, David, believe it or not.
In the 90s, the law was totally different.
Yeah, totally different.
When you look at this, what are the main arguments that say somebody like a brothel worker, a courtesan, is an employee? And what are the main arguments that say, no, she is an independent contractor?
The argument for them being employees is that they really are subject to many, if not completely, the whim of the brothel owners and how they operate within that environment. There have been some brothel workers who have penned op-eds in our local papers saying they don't want to be declared employees and that they feel that they are correctly classified as independent contractors because they have the autonomy like refusing a customer if it's someone who they don't want to engage with, or that they can choose to leave early if they want or pick the times that they operate. And then there's, other nuances on how they're advertised, how they're presented. Most of the brothels do have websites. Certainly Sherry's Ranch does. It's very intricate the way that the courtesans are presented there and how they're communicated with. But basically, the brothel does maintain a lot of control and also kind of calls the shots on how the money is split once they go into the brothel situation. But that's all, contract negotiations with potentially independent contractors or employees, whatever the designation comes down to, but they don't have a lot of power. And I think that's why a lot of them who have been clamoring for a union think that it is a better way to negotiate collectively for some of the things that, they don't get right now as brothel workers.
So it sounds like the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, will decide whether they are employees, and also whether they have a right to organize.
Correct. And then the implication is, this is a very unique set of circumstances, but because it's so intense, and because these other issues like name, image, likeness, like AI come into the conversation, how they are classified for, in a lot of ways, acting. Let's be real. Or, I don't want to be crass, but it is a kind of akin to a lot of other gig economy where you just sort of, dip into the business when you want to. It is going to have implications because if these, mostly women, as I stated, are granted employee status and have the ability to unionize, then I think a lot of other workers who are kind of on that bubble, and we're talking about, rideshare drivers and maybe even actors and others, those construction workers who are out there, could have an argument that if the brothel workers are getting it, how come we're not getting it? That sort of thing. Depending on how the NLRB classifies and what formulas they apply, really could have implications in this fight that is literally in every state. Now you're getting into like influencers and TikTok stars and whatnot, and how they negotiate their contracts and stuff. Can they have representation as a creative in this realm? And I think that this brothel fight is going to have implications for that aspect of it as well.
So Nevada is one of the most heavily unionized states. Vegas is one of the most heavily unionized cities in the U.S. So first of all, why is that? And do you think that fact makes it in any way more likely that the courtesans will prevail? It sounds like you think not, because in the case of dancers, they prevailed, but then the state legislature changed the rules.
Nevada's a mixed bag, David. Yes, you are correct. The Las Vegas Strip itself has one of the strongest unions in the country. The culinary union here is one of the shining lights of the AFL-CIO, and they have unionized every single property on the Las Vegas Strip. We're talking hospitality workers, housekeeping, food, beverage, etc. They are very strong, very mighty, and very powerful as an influence. But Nevada itself is also a right-to-work state. And while we do have some strong union presence, buildings and trade, Teamsters, et cetera, not all occupations are unionized. And certainly we also have a very vibrant gig economy, as you can imagine, in Las Vegas, where there's no chance of unionizing. Just a side note, my dad was a card dealer at the Sahara Hotel for years, and he always wanted to be in a union. But the card dealers, for whatever reason, can't get over the hump of figuring out how to unionize. It's really kind of interesting. So Vegas, like everything else, it's a mixed bag. So yeah, I think that under the current administration, it's highly unlikely that the NLRB is going to deem the individuals as employees. However, I never say never. If they follow the same rules that the state of Nevada followed in the Supreme Court in analyzing the situation, and they do, take into account those federal rules, it's anyone's guess.
What do you think your city can be better listeners can take away from this conversation to make their own city better?
This fight is really a fundamental fight about who deserves protections, whether it's unionized or not, about who deserves minimum wage, who deserves workers' comp, who deserves overtime benefits, who deserves a lot of the protections in the workplace. And then above and beyond that, how are we dealing with these new issues of name, image, likeness exploitation and how AI operates in these realms? Look, our example here is a very unique and intimate one, but I think that no matter how this goes from the NLRB, a lot of states are kind of looking at how this classification is going to shake out, because I think other cities may be concerned about the exploitation of labor, whether it be gig or intimate workers or sex workers or people who are in the creative fields, are definitely going to have these same arguments, maybe not as intense and again, not as intimate, but as important. And I think that any state or city looking at what's happening just outside Las Vegas would be well served to kind of follow the pathway of what these workers are who are standing up for themselves.
Let's turn to the word on the street, or maybe in your case, the word on the strip. I want to harken back to some conversations that you and I have had over the years. So one of the things you've talked to me about in your time at CityCast was how Vegas has neighborhoods that are very diverse in the kinds of jobs that people have compared to other cities. In most cities, like in my city of DC, neighborhoods tend to cluster people in similar kinds of professions. They're similar. They earn at similar levels, and to earn at a similar level, you kind of have to work in a particular cluster of jobs. So my neighborhood, for example, has lots of lawyers and knowledge worker types. But because Vegas is heavily unionized, has lots of well-paying trade professions, and it just has a kind of different economy than other places, neighborhoods are different. So talk about that. Talk about how that changes the community. What's good about it? Is there anything bad about it? Should other cities aspire to it?
Well, I mean, to the degree that we can be egalitarian in where people live and thrive, sure, I think it's a great model. You know, people are shocked, David, to learn that over 2.5 million people live in the greater Las Vegas Valley. Now, while that pales in comparison to the 40 plus million people who come and visit us and tend to stick to just that one street, the Strip, there are lots and lots of folks who live here and find their spaces and find their neighborhoods. And we are, in a lot of ways, a melting pot of the United States melting pot, right? We have more people who aren't from here than who are generationally from here. And so I think in that respect, a lot of neighborhoods form just like you would see it in other neighborhoods. But there is a sense of the transitory nature and the fact that, like you said, there are really interesting, well-paying jobs that allow people to live in areas that perhaps would be precluded in other communities. I could speak to my neighborhood specifically. And, you know, my neighborhood is in the oldest part of downtown. We're the oldest continually residential area, going all the way back to the 1930s, David. Can you imagine how far back that was for a city? Yeah, I know. We're a baby. But, you know, I have a coffee klatch that meets almost every morning at the local coffee shop. And within my coffee klatch are all neighbors. And I will just rattle off some of the jobs of my neighbors. In that group, we have a bartender at a casino. We have a guy who works in gaming technology. We have a general contractor. We have a professional photographer. There's a professional masseuse. There's a lawyer / podcaster. That's me. There's a guy who sells rare records for a living. It's a really mixed group. And within that, there's some ethnic diversity, et cetera. Las Vegas, like any other place, you know, you're going to find a Spanish-speaking area where, you know, there's a lot of lack of ethno-diversity. But generally speaking, I mean, as a lot of people say about Las Vegas, the only color that really matters in a city like Las Vegas is green. So, you know, if you have the money to live in the neighborhood where the prices are appropriate, you're more than welcome. And I think that kind of diversity, if you will, definitely serves us for becoming a more interesting and fuller city, despite the fact that people don't recognize us as such. But we know here.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had like somebody who is a bartender as my neighbor or somebody who is a general contractor as my neighbor. It's boring just to be like, oh, yeah, I also sit in front of a computer all day.
Yeah. Well, they're great at calling out when we get stuff wrong on the podcast or, you know, giving us ideas of things that we should be talking about. I mean, you want to talk about this is what your city is talking about. Come to my coffee klatch at Vesta Coffee every morning, and you'll hear what Las Vegas is talking about from all quarters. It's kind of fun. And I think that's a great part of any neighborhood.
David Figler, thanks for coming on Your City Could Be Better. You can listen to David occasionally on CityCast Las Vegas, which has a new episode out every weekday morning. That's all for today's episode of Your City Could Be Better. I'm your host, David Plotz, and our producers were Lizzie Goldsmith, Priyanka Tilve, David Figler, Sonia Cho Swanson, and Layla Muhammad. Our music is by Carl Christensen. If you're enjoying Your City Could Be Better, why not tell your friends, rate the show, and leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be back next week with another conversation about how your city could be better.